Well, a good evening to you. It is June 1st. I'm meteorologist Nicholas Herboso. We're here to talk a little bit about hurricane season here on Facebook Live and also on our live streaming services, including the Fox 10 Gulf Stream. Please tune in to the Facebook Live and we can actually get you to answer or ask your questions there. I'm meteorologist Nicholas Herboso. I'm excited to be talking a little bit about hurricane season, just kind of shedding some light on what we could be expecting, of course. So once again, go ahead, check in the Facebook comments. I'd love to hear your questions and see if we can get some answers for you. We're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on here, and I'll go ahead and get us started. So June 1st, here we go. We're starting hurricane season, Gulf Coast, and one of the big things that we have is we have a lot of people that are new down here, a lot of people that have moved down here. So I think it's always good to, occasionally come on and talk about what we're expecting this hurricane season. I have a little bit of hurricane history in this presentation as well, so you can kind of see what we've seen in the past year. So should be some good stuff for sure. And also we're going to take a look at what's actually going on right now, some of the factors going into our forecast here. So here we are, hurricane season 2024, the storm names. This is on a 6-year rotation, these names, and if a storm is impactful enough, the names get retired. We do have a couple newer names on the list. You might recognize some newer ones. Milton's kind of a newer one there. But then, of course, we have the normal ones that you might have recognized: Alberto, Beryl, Chris, Debbie, Ernesto. All those have been around actually for quite a while now. Francine, kind of a newer one there. Gordon, that's been around for a little while. Helene, I think that's been around for a little while. Isaac, believe it or not, was not retired. And Isaac was a pretty big storm for Louisiana, but not retired. So we will see an Isaac again. Joyce, Kirk, Leslie, Milton, Nadine, Oscar, Patty, Raphael, Sarah, Tony, Valerie, and William. Those are the names on the list this season. Now, a lot of people ask the questions of what happens if we run out of names? Well, we've actually done something interesting. The World Meteorological Organization has made the decision to create a supplemental names list. We originally went to the Greek alphabet. If you remember hurricane season 2005 and hurricane season 2020, we went to the Greek alphabet. But here's the question: what happens if you have to retire one of those names? Where do you go? So we ended up with a supplemental list that they can essentially use to replace a name. They can just replace a name off of this list because these are just names that are not used in the other 6 lists that are on the board. So here they are: Adria, Braylon, Caridad, Deshawn, Emery, Foster, Gemma. So those are some of the names, and it's interesting to see if we get into this list, how far do we go? Will we ever see a Will? Which is very rare that we see the W name storm in the first place, so hopefully we never see Will. But that's the name list. Some interesting things there, some interesting kind of facts about how they put that together. By the way, there is a way, I believe it's on the World Meteorological Organization website, where you can submit a recommended name. I've looked into that before when I was younger. And of course, there is a Nicholas that is on the name list. So always interesting also to look if your name is on one of these lists as well. All right, so I'm going to take a look at some of the Amy, that was funny. Taking a look at some of the Facebook comments. Moved here from Maine, so hurricanes are new to us. Her first hurricane season in Foley. That's a decent spot to be. You're pretty close to the coast. You know, I'm actually from Fairhope, so not too far away from there, and I've lived in Fairhope my entire life, so I am very familiar with some of the hurricanes. I've actually have a lot of hurricane experience just kind of living through them, especially when I was younger. It's always an experience. You learn something new every single time. And I think we're going to learn new things this year. And we're going to get into the kind of hurricane season forecast in a second. There's a lot of tips that you need to know. There's a lot of kind of things that, like, what do I do when the hurricane's coming for preparedness sake? You know, what are the things I need to do to my house? What are the things I need to do to my car? What are the things I need to do to my fridge? I know it's weird, but there's a lot of things that we can cover and a lot of things that you will learn throughout time and experience coming down here, and a lot of new people are down here, so I think it's good that we do these things and talk about it so much. And something that we've really ramped up. We've been talking about hurricane season a lot more recently leading up to it because I think it's all good information. Really quickly, I want to go ahead and get into not just this here. Go ahead and get into what's going on right now. No tropical development expected over the next 7 days. However, you do see we do have one tropical wave in the Caribbean, which is quite interesting to see. We have had some robust tropical waves already, and this kind of one indication of the hurricane season. We're already seeing some robust tropical waves. It's a little bit out of the ordinary here to see such strong tropical waves this early. Understand that very early in the season, typically not a lot happens. It's typically very slow. We might get a storm out of the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, especially kind of mid-June, late June. But that's pretty much it, and they're typically not very strong. However, once you get later in June, July, you have opportunities to see some stronger storms, and there have been some seasons where we have seen some stronger storms. That's why we encourage you to just go ahead and be ready. Also, something to understand that hurricanes can happen outside of hurricane season. We've had a streak of years, not very recently, the past couple of years we haven't, but a few years ago we had a streak where we had preseason storms every single time. It was May storms, April storms, 2017, I think 2018. So it was a streak where we had some preseason storms. Doesn't really have implications, though, on what the rest of the hurricane season will do. It just kind of depends on the weather pattern at that one particular point. So right now we're predicting an active season. You've heard us talk about it, but we have not had anything yet. And of course it is June 1st, so we will always be watching there. Here is that hurricane season forecast, and it's generating a lot of talk for sure because there are some high numbers here. By the way, in the Facebook comments real quick, before I can go off on a little tangent here. Facebook comments, if you have hurricane experience, I would love to hear some of your tips. It's always an interesting discussion. So put it in the Facebook comments. What are some of your hurricane tips? Lots of water, canned goods. Generator is needed. I learned that during Hurricane Sally. I learned the importance of a generator during Hurricane Sally. But yeah, put your comments in there. I'm interested to see those as well. It's kind of always a team effort preparing for hurricanes down here on the Gulf Coast. So here are the numbers. Once again, Colorado State, 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes, 5 major hurricanes. NOAA, 17 to 25, 8 to 13 of those become hurricanes, 4 to 7 of those become major hurricanes. That's a significant forecast. Don't get me wrong, that is a very, very significant forecast. In fact, it's the highest that they have ever issued for this time of year, this early. A lot of people ask, where do we get this? Where do we get the numbers? You know, it's weird. Our forecasts on a day-to-day forecast, 7 days out, it's like not accurate. You know, it's less accurate. We lose accuracy that far out, because a lot of our forecast models struggle in that time period. But you have to understand the type of forecast that we're doing here. These organizations that are doing these forecasts are not doing a, what's the weather going to be on August 19th? What's the high going to be? What's the low going to be? Is it going to be raining? That's not this type of forecast. We're looking at bigger, long-term patterns. This is stuff like, I'm going to throw some weird names around, Atlantic Meridional Oscillation, El Nino and La Nina, all these kind of bigger atmospheric patterns that we know about and we have history of and we can track. That gives us the guidance for the hurricane seasonal forecast. That's why NOAA uses a range too, because you can't tell an exact number. And another thing, you can't tell exact landfall location. There could be 25 named storms and all of them go out to sea and nothing happens. That is a possibility. But indications are right now that we have the ingredients in place. Those long-term patterns that we talk about are in place, that we have a lot of thunderstorms, or a lot of storms out there, a lot of named storms out there, I should say. That's well above average. So that's the thing. And we're going to go over some of those factors in a second. 14 is the average. 14 tropical storms, and we're going with 17, 25. So it's definitely a more impactful, a little bit more eye-opening, I should say, forecast than we've seen before. Here's one of the reasons. The water temperatures are above normal. We've been saying that for the past couple of years, and that's because the past couple of years they've been above normal. Last year we were at record territory. This year we're also at record territory for these ocean temperatures. When I say record territory, like the heat levels are comparable now, here on June 1st, to where they would be in August. So the water temperatures now are where they would typically be in August. And to understand how hurricanes work, hurricanes feed off of warm waters. Think of it like hurricane fuel. And the more warm water is, the deeper that warm water is, the more the hurricanes can use up that fuel. Heat. Hurricanes are heat engines. They rely on warm water and moisture to be strong, and they sustain themselves. It's a really interesting process how a hurricane works. It's like it's a heat engine. It is a whole ventilation system. It has everything. And when you have a hurricane in a good environment, it's incredible to watch a storm go, because it's an incredible atmospheric process. Hurricanes' jobs overall are to balance out the atmosphere, to distribute heat across the atmosphere. And when the water ocean temperatures are very warm, that can throw things off balance, and hurricanes can be maybe a little bit more impactful because they have a little bit more work to do and they have more fuel to run off of. So you can see actually our water temperatures have gone down very recently right off of our coast. That is because we've had rain the past few days. Still, the Keys are very hot. We've been pushing 90s in parts of the Keys there. You can see the middle 80s. Anything above 80 degrees is supportive of tropical development. Anything above 80 degrees. And you can see we've represented that in that brighter orange. So if I take this full for you so you can see it. And look oh, come on thing. Look anywhere where you have that brighter orange. And I'm saying that brighter, like kind of like darker reddish orange that you see there. That's everywhere that's kind of the check mark good to go for tropical development now. Of course, you have to have other ingredients in there. You actually have to tropical way, but understand that that's a wide area right now that has that at this time. I'm going to show you a different version of this graphic. This is the sea surface temperature anomalies. So kind of a weirder thing. What does that mean? This is a departure from normal. Anywhere you see the blue, that water is cooler than average. Anywhere you see the yellow, orange, and red, that water is warmer than average. That blue streak you see in the Pacific is a signature of one of these long-term patterns that we always talk about. This is the introduction of La Nina. And La Nina is a certain type of pattern that relates to upwelling of cooler water in the Pacific. You're seeing that right there. That's the blue colors there. There's actually a whole bunch of cool water below the surface that is actually getting pushed up. And it has to do with the direction of the winds in the eastern Pacific. And it kind of causes a chain reaction where the jet stream, which would typically race across maybe the Caribbean or the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico during an El Nino, where those water temperatures are warmer than average in the Pacific. Now we drop them with this cool ribbon that actually pushes that jet stream farther north. And that changes some things because jet stream, think wind shear. wind shear aloft, because of jet streams at the upper levels of the atmosphere, right? And as a hurricane builds, if the jet stream's hitting it, it's just blowing all the thunderstorms away. Well, now we don't have that jet stream in place. Or especially in a La Nina year, that thing begins to move away. So you introduce less wind shear, especially in these main development regions like the Caribbean. So those thunderstorms no longer have something blowing them over. They can sustain themselves. I mentioned it earlier, hurricanes are like heat engines. They sustain themselves. They do really well when they're in an open environment with little wind shear, little wind. They can just do and feed off of the warm waters. So interesting thing there. Also, so La Nina, right? Here's these record warm temperatures. This is in Celsius. You see 1 and 2 degrees above average. That's not very much. I promise you that's a lot. That's a lot of energy. This is the ocean we're talking about. This is big kind of stuff. So it is a lot of energy there. And not to sound doom or gloom, but that's just the state of what's happening right now. It is warmer than average. And we have some areas that are much warmer than average. Look at the Bahamas there. You can see some reds, which is getting closer to 3 degrees above average. Much of the Gulf is above average at this time, much of the Caribbean, and much of what we call the main development region of the Atlantic. That is this area, and I'll point it out. This area right here. What happens during hurricane season? We have these things that come off of Africa, tropical waves. They track across, get the chance to develop, and they track and move east, or move west, I should say. And that's the area that they pass over. That's a lot of warm water. So understand that seeing that above average is something notable for us as well. We actually do have some area of cooler than average water in the middle of the Atlantic. That has to do with some of the long-term sea surface temperature patterns that are in place right now. Actually, one of the things that's making us more confident in this kind of higher number of storms in this pattern. Here's another one of those patterns, and this is actually explaining it, La Nina. Cooler water, cooler temps, lower moisture in the Pacific off the coast of South America. That's that blue ribbon we saw earlier. And therefore you have higher wind shear in the Pacific, but then it moves that jet stream, so lower wind shear in the Atlantic, and of course that is where we get our storms. So just a little explanation about that. It's actually, all you need to know, there's lower wind shear in the Atlantic. So that's what you can gather out of that. And that means that there might be more opportunity for these storms to be of higher quality, to do better, to be stronger in the Atlantic. We're looking at a different map now. This is what we call upper ocean heat content. This map essentially shows the depth of the warm water. We showed you the sea surface temperatures and how warm they are. This is the depth of that water. Hurricane sitting over the water, taking up all that moisture, taking up all that warm water, using it to feed its thunderstorms. But if the water's really shallow, the warm water's really shallow, it runs out of it, and then the hurricane starts to weaken. The deeper that warm water is, the more opportunity this thing has to strengthen, this storm has to strengthen. And you can see in those brighter colors that we do have some deeper water out there. This is not atypical to have upper ocean heat content that is deep, but understand that we've been kind of doing this at record pace. The depth of the warm water, the magnitude of the warm water, and how deep it is actually a little bit higher than normal. In fact, we're pushing records in some spots, especially in the Caribbean. So another kind of factor that we look at going ahead, we have to take our notes and be sure we're understanding that we could have an active hurricane season, and we need to take steps to be prepared. All right, I want to go back in hurricane history real quick, just look at a couple things. I do have to kind of push this thing along because I do not have all day. We have to prepare for a newscast here. Here's some of our local hurricane history, some of our hurricanes of record. These are our major hurricane landfalls. This goes all the way back to 1950. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not a lot. But all these storms were storms of impact. In fact, you can see a couple of them came within really close years. Ivan in 2004, Dennis in 2005. And this map does not have Katrina on it, which also caused major impacts for our area, even though it made landfall in Louisiana and then Mississippi. A lot of times we talk about the eastern side of the storm is worse. Why is that? Well, the hurricane spins counterclockwise, so I'm going to draw some arrows on this. Let's take Frederick for an example, so that red dot. Hurricane spinning like this, right? So that's the wind flow around it. So that means that whole entire eastern side has onshore winds. And that's where we have the concern for storm surge. That's why hurricanes that make landfall in Louisiana, Mississippi, they become problems for us because they can produce that onshore flow, which causes storm surge. And storm surge is one of the biggest things in hurricanes. That is that rise of the water level at the coast. And I have a little explainer on that. I don't know if I had that loaded in there. But essentially what it is, you know, whenever you get this water pushing, the wind pushing the water towards the coast. It's literally like pushing water towards one end of the bathtub. It's like you're pushing, pushing, pushing. That water level rises. It has to go somewhere. It goes inland. And whenever we say something like, there's going to be 13 feet of storm surge, that is 13 feet above that normal sea level. So you have to understand your elevation and understand, and this is something good for you if you're new here, look up your elevation. You can go, if you're in Baldwin County, you can go to, I forget, Baldwin County GIS, zoom into your home on a map, and you can actually get your approximate elevation. Mobile County, I think it's City Map, Mobile County, and we're actually going to have this in our hurricane special, which is coming up soon, some more information on that. But look up your elevation, and you can kind of get a more understanding of, okay, are you in a risk area? Especially some of the record storm surges around 20 feet, 25 feet, 28 feet. Those are record storm surges, but understand that that would do impact, if we had that, that would do serious impact to places like Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, some parts of Pensacola, Gulf Breeze, Pensacola Beach, of course, Dauphin Island, always, and even in Mobile if the storm is in the right spot. So understand your elevation. That's a great tip to understand and know, am I at risk of storm surge if a storm is coming our way and if we're on onshore flow side, so on the eastern side of the storm. Here's some other historical hurricane tracks. This does include Katrina. Also, Ida is far there in the western side of this map. Camille as well, another storm of record. Of course, we talk about Frederick. Sally was a great example of something different where we had a slow-moving storm that was very strong, strengthening right before landfall. We learned a lot of lessons out of Sally for forecasting challenges, for what is it like to be in a hurricane eye wall for too many hours, way too many hours, compared to Ivan where it was kind of, you know, it just went. Danny, another lesson learned, where we had a very slow-moving Category 1 hurricane dropped unbelievable amounts of rain. And this kind of gives you the perspective of, okay, it doesn't just have to be a strong storm. It can be a slow-moving Category 1. It can be a slow-moving tropical storm. These storms all create impacts. There's rainfall, there's wind, there's storm surge, and then there's other impacts as well. So you have to kind of say, okay, what is this storm doing? Is it a slow-moving one? Am I going to have a whole bunch of rainfall? Am I going to have to deal with this storm for a long period of time? Versus is it something like Ivan where it's a strong storm coming in and out? We're going to deal with it for a shorter amount of time, but it is going to be very impactful because of how strong the winds are. And we will always do our best to try to communicate that ahead of time. We always want to communicate what is the impact going to be from this storm. Every storm is different. It's really difficult to compare storms, but good thing is that you can learn from previous storms. We have the Facebook comments up here. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. For those of you that went through Sally, those of you that went through Hurricane Sally, I would love to hear some of your lessons learned here. And looking at some of the comments here, generator, non-perishable, water, batteries, flashlights, radio. Radio is a great thing, especially a weather radio and one that has FM, AM as well. When they say evacuate, evacuate. Another quick tip for you, and I'm going to pull myself full screen here. Another quick tip for you, look up your evacuation zone. Every county in our area has evacuation zones. Zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, labeled differently. And we will announce, they will announce when the storm is coming. We're going to do a voluntary evacuation for Zone 1. And that means voluntary evacuation, and there's typically right on the coastal areas. Then there's other zones, and they might go mandatory evacuation. Mandatory evacuation, you got to go. And they're doing that because they've determined these zones. And these zones are based on the risk, specifically of storm surge, but also just general hurricane risk. So when I was growing up, I lived on the edge of zone 2. So I was kind of in an edge case where they would call mandatory evacuations and I would be close to where I wasn't in it. And for example, during Hurricane Ivan, I stayed. My family stayed in Fairhope during Hurricane Ivan. It was an extremely tough situation for us that we had to deal with. We had extensive damage. We were out without power. It's a scary situation for a lot of people, especially for a younger kid when I was younger. A lot of memories from that for me where it's like the whole entire house is shaking and this is an overnight storm. It's super impactful. We chose not to evacuate, and when you choose not to evacuate, that's what you have to deal with. You have to deal with those impacts. You have to deal with sitting through the storm for however long it lasts, and you kind of have to be mentally prepared for that. Taking a case like Sally, this was an extremely exhausting storm because you take the wind of Ivan, which was pretty close to it. Sally was top end Category 2. And you sit through that for hours and hours and hours and hours. And if you were in a place like Fairhope, you did not get into the eye. Remember, the eye is the calm part of the storm. That's the part of the heat engine, part of the exhaust system. The eye is calm, very hot in the eye, but the weather is calm. Right around the eye, the weather's pretty erratic, and then right in the eye wall, the core of the eye wall, the weather is intense. There's a lot of strong wind going on because that's the strongest part of the storm, the eye wall. When you're stuck in the eye wall for a long period of time, my goodness, it is an extremely exhausting situation because you're hearing so much. You're hearing a lot of banging and trees snapping. You know, I think back to Hurricane Sally. Tree snapping, it kind of sounds like somebody breaking a pencil right next to your ear, especially if you have pine trees around you. It's kind of scary to hear. And you kind of have to be ready for that. And I also think about pets and younger kids. They have to be ready for that whenever, if you are staying, to have to deal with listening to that for possibly a long period of time. Sally was a very long period of time. Sometimes you can be in the eye for a long period. An interesting experience with people in Gulf Shores and Orange Beach and Foley as well, that South Foley, that actually got into the eye of Hurricane Sally. It was a really long period where you had nothing going on. And you have to be careful in that. The edge of Hurricane Sally's eye was super erratic. You'd have calm winds for a second, then boom, you had some strong winds. That's just how it was. There are actually these little vortices that sometimes rotate around the eye of a hurricane, and they can produce really sudden gusts of winds. It's an interesting phenomenon. And you have to be careful on your edge of the eye. That's why we always say don't venture out in the eye, because it's often very, very risky to do so. My experience during Hurricane Ivan, apparently we did go outside, look up at the stars, because of course the eye is mostly clear if it's a stronger hurricane especially. So we were able to go outside, look up at the stars, but then you get right back in because that southern side of the storm is coming right back at you. This is if you're getting a direct impact. Once again, put your comments, ask your weather questions. I'd love to see them. Please, we've already had some interesting comments there. Brett says, if you evacuate, best to empty out your fridge. There you go. Otherwise, you come home to a moldy fridge due to power outages, especially for an extended amount of time. Lesson learned with Ida in NOLA. Lesson learned with Sally in Fairhope. A lot of people down here will, of course, purge their fridge before the storm. Purge their fridge, purge their freezer. You have meat in the freezer, you have meat in the fridge, cook it all before the storm. Because otherwise, that turns your house into a very stinky mess. Because if you remember during Hurricane Sally, there was a track change. So we kind of last second had to react a little bit, and we did not take the step of purging the fridge. So a day later, our house is smelling kind of rough because we have meat that's in the fridge and a whole bunch of stuff that's in the fridge. The fridge is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So you have to remember to be smart. Go ahead and get the non-perishables, have all that ready, and especially if you're staying, because you have to live with that smell for a while, make sure you have that fridge purged. And then if you are evacuating, coming back, make sure you have that fridge purged too, because that is going to be nasty to come back to. Understand that after a hurricane, if you're without power and you do not have a generator, you're going to be living in that environment for You're going to be living in that environment for a while, so you have to deal with that kind of smell and stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that happens there. And if you're prepared for it, you end up doing well. You can actually not have to deal with that. And that's why I also recommend a generator, because you can power things like a refrigerator if you have a strong enough generator. And that is always a super useful thing. Aaron, please stop staring stress and anxiety. No duh, we get it. You won't know till it's at the back door, hurricane shift and incident. That's a good point. And a lot of people do have anxiety about this. And we talk about some of the bad stuff, and I think we're talking about a lot of the bad stuff right now. But understand that so many people do get through this every single time. And that's just, it's always a community effort. When we have people that help each other out. And this is always good. You have people coming in, helping each other out. These kinds of things are good, especially people that are new. We got to understand that, yes, hurricanes are rough to go through. I think we've all learned that, for those of us that are down here. But you do kind of have to take a deep breath and say, like, okay, and a lot of people do have storm anxiety, and then that's a rough thing to deal with. And we want to always inspire confidence. And that's why we think about these hurricane tips and try to let people know what is happening. What might happen, what kind of the worst case scenario can be, so people can be prepared. The more prepared you are, the less that anxiety goes down, the more that anxiety goes down, and you can be comfortable saying, I know I am ready. And that's why we do this stuff kind of early on. You want to have this stuff done, you want to have this stuff prepared early, so you can be more confident if a storm does come, and understand that is an if. So good point there. Sally was a rough storm, a lot of loud noises, did not think it was ever going to end. Paula putting that in there. That's how it feels, especially with a lot. And Sally, there was a nighttime component to that as well. It was interesting with Sally and Ivan. We both had that nighttime component. So that's a little scary, not being able to see everything. But good thing is it did pass eventually. And I remember that morning, you go out and you start cleaning up a little bit after the storm. And it was crazy after the first light to see what that revealed for many of us. Hurricanes cause damage. We have to realize that. And if you're in southern Alabama, eventually you will have some damage. If you're in northwest Florida, eventually you'll have some damage. It's just a way of life here, and we always, always, always move on from it. And it's interesting. I said it earlier. It's good that the community comes together, and the community comes together and works together to kind of push us along. Because that's what we need to do. But it's just the way of life down here, and we deal with it. We always deal with it. We always pull together. And I think you should get confidence here in seeing the other people that are on here and saying, we've all lived through this. We've all lived through this, and we all kind of march on. So good stuff there. A lot of people, it is your first season, Andrea. Good info. And I will tell you this, I'm kind of rambling here. Our hurricane special, we will have more and more information. And throughout the hurricane season, we're going to try our best to share this information, talk impacts. I had listened to a great discussion from some other meteorologists, and we were just kind of talking about, they were just kind of talking about what steps can the general public take to prepare themselves. And a lot of people get storm anxiety. A lot of people worry about this. Taking one small step, like looking up your evacuation zone, looking up your elevation, going ahead, going to Walmart, going to Publix, whatever, buying that extra pack of water and just storing it in the pantry. Going ahead and buying the non-perishables on your next grocery trip, couple, and just stocking them in. You're taking a step in the right direction at that point, and that's good, because that gets you more prepared, and that can begin to ease some of that anxiety there. So small steps. Small steps really do help. And I think a lot of people, they come down here, the hurricane season, we're talking about this, I'm talking about, oh my God, there's going to be so much damage. Just take one of the steps and you're going in the right direction. You do not have to do this miraculous thing. Preparing for a hurricane is not a miraculous, like, I have to do this, do this, do this. As long as you're taking some steps, you are putting yourself in a better position, and that is great. Let's see here. I've grown up, this is from Shelby Henry. I've grown up in the South, grown up in South Alabama and lived in North Florida. I watch this every year to be prepared. It eases my anxiety to know, or at least have an idea of what to possibly expect. Better to over-prepare than under-prepare. And that is always a good point. I think a lot of people, it's interesting that, like, you know, why wouldn't you over-prepare? And some of us kind of like, oh, it slips our mind, and you know, like, suddenly the storm comes and we're like, oh, goodness. That's why we kind of push these reminders so much, because like, it's good. Just be prepared. Have a kit ready. Have some supplies ready. Have your radio. Have your generator. Have your non-perishable food items. Have your water. Have your plan for where you're going to go if you have to evacuate. Have all that done now, so then you can just be like, okay, storm's coming. Let's just go ahead and go. Let's just get out of here. Let's be done, and let's just take it easy. And we'll come back to what we need to come back to. So a good point there. Any other points here? Let me scroll up a little bit in the comments. And I'll keep going here. So I wanted to actually pull this up. This is some interesting. Some of the strongest hurricanes. Just to tell you, these are rare to see storms this strong. 2005 was an exceptional year where we saw multiple very, very strong storms. Wilma and Rita, both of those got into the Gulf of Mexico. Rita, kind of a forgotten storm for places like Lake Charles. But they, of course, had extensive damage from that. Wilma, big storm, one of the strongest. 882 millibars for pressure. Meteorologically, that's so impressive. Huge, incredible storm there. So understand that we do have strong storms. But thankfully, recently, recently we have seen some strong storms, so not thankfully. Recently, we have seen some strong storms that have gotten close to land. We think back to Hurricane Michael very recently that made landfall near Mexico Beach and Panama City. And of course, you saw what kind of damage that produced. We have seen a couple examples, like Sally, of more rapid intensification right before a storm makes landfall. And it's something we just have to be watch out for. And if you are prepared beforehand, you are setting yourself better. You're setting yourself up better to be prepared for those kinds of situations. So, can you get tornadoes while having hurricanes? Oh, I'm going to go back and graphic for this one. Yes, you can. And Hurricane Ivan was a great example of this. Hurricane Ivan in the northeastern quadrant of the storm actually produced lots of tornadoes, especially in the Florida Panhandle. And the reason behind that was a meteorological reason. There was a special setup for why Ivan produced so many tornadoes, but understand that in that northeastern quadrant, at least here on the Gulf Coast, where we are, Fox 10 viewing area, especially that northeastern quadrant, can produce tornadoes. That's just because of the kind of orientation of the coastline and the kind of typical setup with upper level winds and storm winds, how that sets up. Where do they often set up? Often in the outer bands. Outer bands can pack a punch. Get all those preparations done before the outer band gets there, because goodness, once it starts raining, it gets gusty pretty quickly. And that may be tropical storm force winds, it's not a big deal, but it's enough to slow you down in preparation. So that's why we always want you to prepare ahead of those outer bands. And of course, you have that tornado risk. Tornadoes during tropical weather are a huge challenge for us as meteorologists, especially on television, because we often talk about, we're going to go wall-to-wall coverage for a tornado warning. These tornadoes last a very short amount of time. They're quick spin-up tornadoes. They're on the ground for a little bit, then they're up. These kinds of storms, they're quick. There's a lot of movement in the outer bands. There's a lot of wind movement, a lot of churning going on. So these are really quick spin-up tornadoes. So it's really hard to track them sometimes. So that's why you want to go ahead and kind of be ready to take shelter, be aware of what's going on, know what to do, just in case one of these stronger rain bands comes your way and it looks like there's a tornado potential. And we'll always, of course, try our best to talk about that. Understand, I know we have some people that move here from Tornado Alley. These tropical hurricane, or tropical tornadoes, I should say, we're not going to be tracking them street level by street level. They're going to be quick spin up. So it's going to be, hey, there's a warning here. there's a tornado possibly on the ground, and there's a tornado possibly developing, we see it on signature, it's not going to be a crazy radar signature. It's going to be a weaker radar signature, and then it's going to be gone. So we have to act fast, and then you kind of have to act fast too. We're not going to be something where we can track this thing miles and miles and miles at street level because they're just too short-lived. Beach vacation planned. Brody, hey Brody, one of my good friends there. What about if we have a beach vacation planned, hurricane strikes? Could we lose your money? That's an interesting question. I don't know the perfect answer to that because I haven't had experience with vacationing during a hurricane. But a lot of times I think they will have some kind of policies. A lot of these condos, a lot of these hotels will have policies in place for hurricanes. That would be something to look into there. I do have to wrap this up pretty soon, so I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. We talked about stronger storms. Go ahead and go back really quickly to hurricane names. That's our name list once again. We'll be getting familiar with that through the season. We have our hurricane special coming out. We want you to check that out. It's going to be useful information. I think we have a lot of stuff, good stuff planned for that coming up next Friday. So once again, we thank you for joining us here. I know this is a very kind of off-the-cuff kind of thing, but maybe good to just kind of sit down and talk about it. And as a community, kind of hear what other people have to say about hurricanes as we prepare for this hurricane season. Of course, the first day of hurricane season here. So thank you for joining us once again, and we are preparing for our newscast, so we have more coming up here on this June 1st. We have a lot of storms to talk about as well that we had earlier today. So we'll be talking about and preparing for all of that, of course. Thank you for joining us here, and thank you for engaging in the comments so much. We really appreciate that. Once again, I'm going to actually leave this up real quick before we go. If you want to tune into these kinds of things regularly, of course we do them on Facebook Live, but we also have them on our Fox 10 Gulf Stream. So check it out. You can actually access the Fox 10 Gulf Stream. It's essentially like a Netflix app, but it's for Fox 10. And that is on your Roku, Apple TV, or Fire TV. It is an app that you can get on the TV, a super useful thing. You can watch our newscasts, our in-depth weather segments, and much, much more, all that on our Fox 10 Gulf Stream. Hey, we're going to be doing this regularly, especially whenever we have these long-form lines. We can talk about this. You can ask your questions. So hopefully we can do these more often. You can continue to engage with us. We thank you so much for joining in. I'm Meteorologist Nicholas Herboso. I'll see you on the news coming up in just a bit on Fox 10.